This is my YouTube disclaimer. I am reading a dark epic fantasy in the style of Game of Thrones and Tolkien. The author is myself, Angela B. Chrysler, and the book is Dolor in Shadow. I am the author and the publisher, and I have full rights for this book reading. No copyrights and no user term agreement are being violated in the reading of this book. Okay, chapter 16. Dagon stared over the darkness draped upon the Leosopus tents. Dawn spilled blotches of blue, gray, and black light that stretched into the trees where he waited. Many would die that day. Not a part of him cared anymore. There was only one other left who bothered to concern himself with. He shifted his gaze to Kallan, who had long since administered her orders to the commander of her 2nd Division. With her Amadou pouch fastened beside the steel and elding dagger at her waist, Kallan wore leather and mail beneath her full set of elding plate armor. Her helmet encased her head. The nose guard distorted her face so much that he could barely make out her eyes peeking through the mail-lined helmet where she had tucked her hair. Standing beside him, she looked like one of her men. "It is time." Kallan's cold voice cut the air. "What of the sentries?" he asked. "Silenced." "The safe?" "My sword." Kallan's terse answer chilled the back of Dagon's neck. He knew nothing better to underestimate the delicate frame of the Sithkona. The scythe was stronger than anything in the Dayvagar could create in Alfheim. The shield secured to her forearm was unmarked for a reason. Gudrun is in position, awaiting the signal, secured within the pines on the cleft. Dagon peered to the ledge in the distance where Gudrun waited. "Whenever you're ready." Her instructions were curt, confirming she had closed out the last of her emotion. Dagon turned to the army hidden within the trees behind him, where 30,000 Dokofa waited in the Alfheim wood, armed with axe, shield, and spear. Gripping the handle of his broadsword, Dagon shifted his gaze through the forest. Looking to his queen, he nodded slightly. "Bring me their king," Kallan bade, and with that order Dagon raised his sword and released his battle cry. The army echoed his order. Their voices rose from the darkness, sending the signal to the southern cleft where Gudrun raised her arms. With Said's staff in one hand and Said in the other, Gudrun spoke with fervor beneath her breath. The wind stirred, blowing her silver hair in a wild torrent as she turned her palm out and launched a single stream of lightning into the tents. Fire erupted within the valley, and she saw Dagon join the charge, his sword still raised. Warriors raced by as Kallan summoned her scythe. With a flick of her wrist, she discharged the stream of flames that arched into the camp and set the tents ablaze. Unsheathing her sword, Kallan raised her voice and charged, following her men into the open. Into the valley Dagon led the Dokafar. Their cries held strong until they stood in the very center, beside Gudrun's inferno, where, one by one, their voices died out. All was silent, save for the roaring flames. The dozen soldiers who had run out to meet them had already perished. Not a single Leosopar emerged from his burning tent. Not a single retaliatory cry was uttered. The Dokafar looked about for the enemy as Dagon assigned half a dozen men to search the tents. The Dokafar threw back the tent openings, upturned tables and chairs, and smashed the Leosofar's possessions. A blanket of confusion settled over the army as Kallan pushed her way to Dagon's side. "Dagon!" Kallan's voice carried over the men. She emerged from the crowd, her sword still unsheathed at her side. "Where are they?" he asked. "Did they head out?" "Their tents are still here," Kallan said, sweeping her hand to the abandoned camp as she stepped to the side. "Then what?" A gust of wind, and Dagon roared. Kallan looked back to her first commander. An arrow retreated from his left shoulder. He wrapped his hand around the wood, and wincing, broke off the shaft. A single stream of blood trickled down his bicep, where the arrow's head had embedded into the thick of his shoulder, and Kallan turned her face to the sky. "Shields!" she cried, and thrusting her blade into the earth, she slammed her hands to the sky, and with it, her scythe. From her body, an iridescent glow erupted, encasing her in energy. Facing the ring of arrows, the Dokafar raised their shields in a wave that started with Kallan's cry. The arrows shattered against the scythe, unable to penetrate the shield Kallan formed. She looked to the north, where countless Leosopar archers unleashed a second volley among the pines. Releasing her spell, Kallan refocused her energy into her palms and swept her arms, whipping her red flames through the archers. From the cleft, Gudrun uttered a charm. Lightning surged from her palms as she directed her scythe into the archers, who scattered in a vain attempt to escape. From behind them, Rune's army rose up and charged the clearing where the Dokafar met the attack. Axe cleaved bone, and spearmen impaled foes, spilling Alfar blood. In the one hand, Kallan wielded her flame while she swung her sword with the other. Securing a wide perimeter around her, she slaughtered any who dared approach her for a chance at the killing and the glory. Almost immediately, she lost sight of Dagon amid the chaos. Warriors of 2, 3, then 5 came at her, each group failing to slay her as the red sun rose. Desperate to take the Sidkona down, Rune fought his way through the battle. He slowed as he approached her, waiting and watching for the chance to move in. Only Bergen had ever made it this close to her. Armed with flame and sword, she left no opening. He assessed her skills, deciding she was equivalent to 10 of his best men. She shifted. A warrior lunged and she threw him back. She repeated the process until the rare chance came when one of his soldiers stepped from behind the Sidkona and closed his arm around her neck. Believing the soldier had her, Rune raised his sword. The Sidkona released a blast of energy, throwing the Gappler onto his back, and as she poured her fire onto his assailant, Rune closed in, his sword raised. A flash of iridescent lapis blue caught his eye, and within that time she knew him, and the Sidkona paused. Her delay was all the time Rune needed. Black blade clipped her the iron and dislodged her helmet, throwing her to the ground unconscious. Holding his breath, Rune drew back his sword, preparing to thrust the tip through her heart, and froze. At once he understood the Sidkona's hesitation. Chestnut hair spilled across the red-soaked earth. Pearlescent skin was splattered with blood, seeping from a gash above her tapered ear, and Rune recalled the grief-laden eyes of the maiden. The mass of his sword weighed down his arm, but he kept the blade suspended. He'd sought the Sidkona for years. She needed to die. He tried to convince himself. She had to die, and yet his arm would not obey. His eye swept over her, examining the wound he had inflicted. She was losing too much blood. She would die from that wound within minutes if he did nothing. A stab of hate swallowed his guilt. He could not suffer her to die a slow death. His conclusion silenced his conscience, but not soon enough. A shallow pierce to his neck stayed his hand, and Rune stiffened. "Give me a reason to cut off your head so that I may hand it to her." The words, laden with a Dokkafar's brogue, hissed. "Stand down!" Rune held his stance as the warrior's sword cut deeper into his throat. He stole a glance to the armband of silver and Elding, and Rune knew the Queen's captain before meeting his amber eyes. The stream of blood still poured from the arrowhead lodged in his flesh. 3 inches to the right, and Rune could have saved himself this trouble. He glanced at the woman. She was growing paler. "Stand down!" The captain's voice was colder this time. Rune's stomach tightened as he eyed the body before him. "I should stab her," he thought. But the glory of a Sidkona's death no longer carried the pride it had moments ago, and death for him was certain. Unless... Rune lowered his sword to his side. Only a few feet in front of him, a Liasafar warrior took his last breath, doubled over the Dokkafa blade that speared his stomach. With that warrior's death, a great wave rippled through the battlefield that would turn the tide of the war. Around him, Rune's men fell, overwhelmed against the odds. They fought in vain to win the honor awaiting them in Odin's hall. They fought until the last Liasafar of Rune's army perished, and 2 Dokkafa seized Rune by the arms. A third took his sword and stripped his weapons, removing them as they found them. Svandal grew quiet. Screams replaced the victor's cry. The captain held his fiery glare, the tip of his blade still nestled in Rune's throat. More guards raised their swords, while others stripped the king's armor. All the while, Rune gazed upon the Sidkona. She was growing paler by the minute. He wasn't the only one who had noticed. Rune watched as the warrior, battling remorse, fell broken to the Sidkona's side. Gently, the captain lifted her head and brushed back a long, blood-stained lock of hair. His large hands trembled as he slipped an arm behind her back, and as if he cradled a precious jewel, pulled her into him. A twinge of envy pricked Rune's chest. "Where is the Dark One?" a Dokkafa soldier grunted. Rune made no movement to show that he heard as his thoughts filled with Bergen, riding with Yoren to the desecrated remnants that would be left of Svandal. He thought of the vengeful eye Bergen would turn to Lorlenalin. The battlefield had a new sound as the Dokkafa slaughtered the last of the Liasafar. Only the fire continued the battle, consuming the tents. "Where is he?" the Dokkafa asked again. Too clearly Rune envisioned Bergen's head rolling about in the white courtyard. Blood would streak the stone, while he, Rune Tryggvason, the eldest son of the great Lodvuk, looked on helpless as his father's kingdom fell, its memory left to the mercy of Dokkafa bards and scribes. "Dead," Rune said. Shackles clamped his wrists. The captain cradled his maiden, taking great care not to jostle the dying woman. He shifted to stand as Rune watched the Sidkona held adoringly by the Dokkafar. He knew her as either a daughter or a lover, perhaps. Surely, if anyone knew who she was, he would. "Who is she?" The captain raised his head. Cold hatred emanated from the Dokkafar. The silence stretched as Rune waited. "You don't know," the captain said. It wasn't a question. but a calm observation, chilled and made rigid by the Sekona's imminent death. The pang in Rune's chest tightened as the captain turned his back to him. "Dokafa!" Rune said, drawing his adversary's attention once more. "Her name!" The captain glared, and without an answer, he left Rune to his captors.